What's up, Serpa Squad? Tanner here, and this is the 5-month look at the biOrb terrarium. It looks like a little jungle now. Although most of the plants have grown in really well and the Begonia Rex has bloomed, I encountered an issue with this setup. Long story short, I went on a business trip and didn't prep it well enough before my departure. During my absence, it wasn't watered enough and dried up to the point that a lot of the plants perished. Unfortunately, it just hasn't been the same since. Although I wish that wouldn't have happened, I always knew that I'd redo it for something more unique. And this one will do exactly that. Let's dismantle the current setup. In doing so, I made sure to carefully remove all of the plants, hardscape, and botanicals. I wanted to preserve everything for future setups and for the redo. In fact, I repurposed the pagoda stone from the initial setup in the DIY patio pond from last week's video. When all was said and done, the only remaining component was the substrate, which as you can see is quite dry. It wouldn't work like this, so I got it rehydrated. To get the job done, I simply dumped some water into the substrate and mixed it around. By the title of the video, you know that I'm adding a pond to this scape. My initial idea was to use a piece of metalamat as an insert to create a pond basin. As I tried this, I realized it wasn't going to work because I couldn't get the pond big enough. Eventually I scrapped this and went on to a more practical idea. I cut out a small sheet of pond liner that was left over from the DIY pond build. I put the liner in the hole that I dug out previously and did my best to have it lay flat on the bottom. After that, I could start incorporating the hardscape. For this one, I'm using Terrarium stone, which is a nice, inexpensive stone that will bring great character to any build. The stones were placed around the edges of the liner to make a section for the waterfall on the left and for an embankment elsewhere. With most of the rocks in place, I added the pump. I'm just using a little nano submersible pump with a 3/8 inch final tube. I hid the pump under a stone and ran the tube up to the waterfall formation. After that, I worked in the remainder of the stones to complete the scape. Now it's time to foam the waterfall. For this one, I'm using Great Stuff Gaps and Cracks expanding foam. I didn't need much at all for this build, just a little bit in between the rocks that make up the waterfall. I also applied some under this overhang rock to create some stability. I let the foam cure overnight and then removed the excess by hand. Let's test out the pond. I filled it up with some water and let it rip. Well, that was anticlimactic. Let's turn up the flow. I don't know about you, but I think that looks much better. With the water feature up and running, I could remove the excess pond liner. In doing so, I trimmed it down, making sure to leave about a 1/2 inch gap above the water line. This will ensure that nothing leaks and that I can have a variable depth of water. It still looks pretty rough, but now you can get a better idea of how it's going to look at the end. Before adding more substrate, I went and chopped up some pond underlayment into small pieces. I put these pieces into cracks between the substrate and the rock so that minimal, if any, substrate will get down into the water. Currently, the pond looks really out of place because the landscape doesn't match. Using the same custom ABG mix as the initial build, I drastically changed the topography of the land. It didn't take much, but it sure made a world of difference. After that, I got a pack of command decorating clips for cord management. I stuck a few of these to the back side of the container and ran the pump's cord through them. Don't worry, I'll do more to hide this later on. Now on to the remainder of the hardscape, which consists of manzanita wood. Although the scape could totally work with just stones, it never hurts to add some wood. It took me quite a while to get this just right, but the extra time is always worth it. Let's bring the biOrb to life with the plants. First up is the rough Maidenhair from the previous build. These ferns really appreciate consistent conditions, so hopefully it will forgive me for moving it around. I also have 2 Pellaea Glowstar ferns. These are a nice compact fern with deep green foliage. Every setup usually benefits from a nice pop of red, so the Begonia Rex Rumba from the previous setup was planted into this one. Hemigraphis repanda was included as well for its fine textures and purple leaves. Lastly, I used a few cuttings of Fittonia leatherleaf in the background to hide the cords. At this point I was getting annoyed working around the studio lights and the reflections on the orb, so I decided to put the lid on for the remainder of the scape. Then I proceeded to add the remainder of the plant, starting with Chlorophytum bichetii. This is a nice grassy plant that will add some great vertical upright contrast. Next up were some of the mossy elements. These nice patches of liverwort will really help add some nice texture and create good ground coverage. Fern moss was stuffed into the crevices between the rocks. I also placed a huge patch of sphagnum moss atop the waterfall. A few Cryptanthus nubicola were also put throughout. Under bright light they will turn a nice orange hue, which I think will look really great in this setup. From there I added some Acorus gramineus, miniums aureus to the edges of the pond area to get some nice marginal plant growth. After that I planted a few Anubias nangi to add something with more prominent leaves. Then I went around and placed several patches of Pellaea moss in the foreground. I also put the Pilea glauca Aqua Marine from the previous scape into the background. Long term this will grow towards the front and create some great texture. Finally, it was time to cover up the remaining spots of exposed substrate with leaf litter. I used the willow oak leaves from before, but I broke them up into smaller pieces to help retain the sense of scale. Lastly were the final details, which included several segments of Selaginella crowsiana gold tips and Ficus pumila Quercifolia. I added these last so that they would grow over top of the leaf litter. After that I added a few handfuls of gravel to the pond basin. It was filled up with water and topped off with some Azolla carolinina. After all of that I added the springtails and gave the biOrb a good spray down. There you have it, a pond inside of an Oase biOrb air. I think it turned out really well and even looks better than the previous scape, although I really did like that one as well. This build was actually requested when I uploaded the previous video, so I'm glad to have made it happen. I'm also glad that I encountered issues with the previous scape, because had those not occurred, I probably wouldn't have redone this as quickly as I did. Doing something like this in a biOrb makes sense because of the self-regulated circulation fans. Because of these, there's no concern of the acrylic fogging up, and visibility is always good. It's also nice that the cord can go out of the opening and nestle inside of this gasket area without modifying the container. Now that you've seen this, I'm sure many of you will want to see a waterfall pond inside of a regular terrarium. I'm still working out the logistics for that, but I'll try to make it happen sometime soon. In the meantime, I really hope you enjoyed this one. Until next time, Serpa Squad, take care and peace.